Yeah, you can record.
Okay, we're recording.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Sorry, I thought you were already recording.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay, so we continue the discussion. Where is the annotating light?
No, it's follow as well.
It's the wrong one.
No,
yeah, that thing. Yeah. We're continuing the discussion that we already began last week. And the concept was that elements, things that were purposefully designed and made for avodah zarah, for idolatry, carry an issur, they carry prohibitions. And then we spoke about the fact that if they are broken, then the fact that it's broken could cause its status as idol worship to be revoked. And then the Gemora spoke about how it broke, if you remember. And what's quite interesting is the general idea is that it's the idol worshippers themselves who have the power, the mandate to revoke the status of whatever the thing is that they're made to serve. But people who don't serve idols, firstly, a Jew doesn't have the power to revoke the status of something as idol worship. And in fact, according to the commentaries, although it doesn't say it in the lines of the Gemora itself, even a non-Jew, even a Gentile.
Abraham did it. He broke his father's statue.
Right, but
he destroyed it.
He destroyed them. But over there's no discussion on what to do with the pieces. Nobody told us which guy got the contract for salvage. When Abraham finished smashing his dad's idols, it doesn't say there in the Torah, not all the details are in play. Whom Terach called in as a salvage clearance place to pay for the broken stock.
That was thousands of years before the Gemora.
Yeah, but our question is, when idols or things that are used for idol worship are broken, smashed into pieces, the broken parts are, in many cases, they lose their status as avodah zarah, and then it can be used. You can use it in a recycling plant or whatever else it is you're going to do with it. You can use it as a paperweight. And if you remember, we've said it a few times, but just to give the context once again, the idea was that if the person himself who serves it breaks it, then he himself revokes its status as avodah zarah. He's showing that his intention is that this is no longer avodah zarah. Furthermore, according to Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's an argument there between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish that if it breaks on its own, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that's not good enough because he himself didn't break it, so we're not sure if he revoked the status. But according to Resh Lakish, it is, even though it broke on its own, considered permissible. It is considered as though the status is revoked. He would say, well, it couldn't save itself, so therefore it's considered as if it's revoked. So in this context that we've just said, we read another brisa, another passage, which is another objection that Rabbi Yochanan raises against the opinion of Resh Lakish. Eisvei, we raise an objection, a question. There's a passage, there's a brisa that says that a Gentile is able to revoke the status of his own avodah zarah as well as the avodah zarah of another Gentile, his friend. But a Jew is not mevatel. A Jew doesn't have an ability to revoke the status of avodah zarah of a Gentile. So this is what that passage says that's being quoted in the Gemora. It's only a Gentile that can smash avodah zarah and therefore revoke its status as avodah zarah, but a Jew can't. So therefore, practically speaking, if there's something that's useful, a statue or whatever it is, and it's some form of avodah zarah, some form of avodah zarah, either the Gentile who owns it or another one, if they break it, we're not going into damages here because the guy that breaks it could get in trouble for breaking someone else's possession, but that's a separate discussion. The fact is that a person that serves avodah zarah can revoke the status of avodah zarah. A person that doesn't serve Avodah Zarah, a Jew, cannot revoke its status. The fact that he breaks it doesn't mean that he or another Jew can use it or benefit from it. The broken pieces are the same as the Avodah Zarah itself. So over there we ask a question, why? Why is it that when a Jew breaks it, the status is not revoked? Shouldn't that be the same as Avodah Zarah that broke on its own? Resh Lakish already said that if it smashes on its own, it's as if the owner broke it. So it should be the same thing if a Jew broke it. What's the difference if a Jew broke it or if it broke on its own? So the Gemora says, if a Jew broke it or if it broke on its own, what's the difference? Resh Lakish said that if it breaks on its own, the status is revoked. But here we see if a Jew breaks it, the status is not revoked. What's the difference if it breaks because it fell off somebody was, how would you call it? Was cleaning and smashed it. So the Gemara continues to explore this. Omar Abaya says, the problem is shepachasa. You know what the problem was? You know, when you've got a question in the Gemara tries to fiddle and find various possibilities. So the Gemara wants to say that maybe Resh Lakish would say, if a Jew really broke it, then it's fine, it's considered broken. The owner would consider it broken and the status revoked. But in this case, we weren't talking about a real breakage. You know, sometimes you break something and it's irreparable, and sometimes it's broken, but it's not really broken. It broke on a seam, it broke on a joint, you can put it together easily, it bent out of place, but it's not really broken. So Abaya says, Omar Abaya shepachasa. We're talking that the Jew bent it out of shape without actually breaking it. In other words, if he really broke it, then maybe they would have said that the status is revoked, even though it was a Jew. Because it's broken. Broken is broken. Who cares who broke it? But the issue here was that the Jew didn't properly break it. He just bent it out of shape. And that's why it was not considered revoked in terms of its status. So the Gemara asked, and what's the difference if he bent it as opposed to actually breaking it? We have another Mishnah that said that if the Avodah Zarah was bent out of shape, even though it wasn't broken, it's still bottled, it's still nullified. In other words, there's another place which says when we say that you revoke the status of the Avodah Zarah by breaking it, it doesn't have to be absolutely broken. If somebody bent it out of shape, it's also okay. So the Gemara says, that's when a non-Jew bends it out of shape. But if a Jew bent it out of shape, it's not bottle. In other words, we're basically struggling to find an answer and we're not succeeding. In other words, what do we keep coming back to? We keep coming back to the fact that it would seem that if a Jew is the one who breaks it, if a Jew is the one who bends it, whatever a Jew does, he doesn't take away its status as Avodah Zarah. And the main point of this Gemara is to say, you, Resh Lakish, said that if it smashes on its own, it's lost its status as Avodah Zarah. So why not, if a Jew breaks it or bends it out of shape, is it still Avodah Zarah? Surely that doesn't add up. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe when it breaks on its own, it's also no good. It's only when he himself breaks it that it loses its status as Avodah Zarah. So at this point, the Gemara brings in the statement of Rava and says, Rava says, the truth of the matter is that it should be that if a Jew breaks it, it loses its status as Avodah Zarah. And even if a Jew bends it out of shape, it is going to lose its status as Avodah Zarah. The decree is, maybe the Jew will lift it up and then he will revoke the status of Avodah Zarah. We'll explain that outside in a moment. It will become an idolatrous artifact in the hands of a Jew. The problem over here is as follows. According to what Rava is introducing, and it's a very important formula because the Gemara is going to use the same formula to answer about 4 or 5 questions now. The Gemara says the following. Truth of the matter is that even if a Jew breaks it, it should lose its status as avodah zarah. Even if it's a Jew breaks it, because ultimately broken is broken. So even if it's a Jew, it should lose its status of avodah zarah. But what was the issue? The sages came along and made a special decree. And why did they make their special decree? The problem here was, or the challenge I should say, is that the Torah focused with extra stringency when it comes to a Jew and avodah zarah, to such an extent that the Torah said, if a Jew makes avodah zarah, if a Jew owns something that's avodah zarah, it can never lose its status as an idolatrous thing. Whether he made it, whether he owns it, a Gentile made it and he bought it and owns it. Once a Jew has possession of something that's avodah zarah, it can only be destroyed. It's not like a guy. A guy, he can say, you know, I used to serve this and think it was an idol. Now I don't think that anymore. Changed my mind. Smash. It's over. But a Jew cannot do that. Now, says Rava, an interesting, a novel thought. He says the following. If we allow a Jew to break it and revoke the status as avodah zarah, what happens if he lifts it up while he's breaking it and takes possession of it? You know, there's a thing called a kinyan akbar. If somebody gives you something, the way it will work is it becomes the possession of the person who lifts it. What happens if while he is lifting it to break it, it becomes his? Non-Jew brings it to him and he says, I don't mind if you have my getchka, my idol. The Jew says, oh, okay, but I need it for other things, so I'm going to smash it and revoke its status. And as he's about to smash it, it becomes his property. Problem is, once it belongs to a Jew, it can never be bottled anymore. If you want the avodah zarah and the guy's got it, and you want the material, you need him to revoke the status first. Once it belongs to a Jew, it's not going to be bottled anymore. It can't. And the challenge, says Rava, is that we're worried. Technically, a Jew breaking it, a non-Jew breaking it, technically should be the same. It's the same story. It's a getchka, it's a deity, it's an idol, it's avodah zarah. Somebody smashes it and indicates that it's no longer avodah zarah. But the worry of the sages was that if a Jew will lift it up and take possession, then his breaking it won't help anymore. So they made a gezeira, that means they made a decree, and they said a Jew cannot break it and revoke its status. In other words, he can't take possession of it, he can't break it, it doesn't happen in his hands at all. If he gets hold of it, then it's over. It can't be utilized and no more benefit from it anymore. So that was Rava's rule.
Take it a bit further means that we did accept it that way. We could revoke any, break it or not, effectively. So if a Jew was allowed to break and revoke it, I could just stay and say it's no longer avodah zarah, because whether broken or not, once you get the permission.
According to Rava midoraisa, which means the original law of the Torah, well, that would be okay. You would be able to do that. But our worry is that the problem is what happens if it becomes, it's the order. You know, we call the Seder. You know what a Seder is on Pesach? It's called Seder, means order. Kadesh urchat karpas yachatz. On Pesach night, we're very stringent that everything's got to be in order. It's not, if it's Morer Kairech, then Morer has to be before Kairech. There's no changing of that order. What they're worried about here, the sages, is the order. A Jew can revoke the status and then own it, but he can't own it and then revoke the status. And it's too much of a gray area. Therefore, the sages came and said, it's too blurred, it's too gray. He can't break it and revoke the status because we'll get mixed up. So Elog Zairates a decree. A decree means a rabbinic decree. Dilma Magbala, what happens if he lifts it? The Hodam Avatala and then nullifies it. The Havei Avodas Kechavim B'Yad Yisrael. That will be called Avodas Kechavim in the hands of a Jew. V'chol Avodas Kechavim B'Yad Yisrael, and any Avodah Zarah in the hands of a Jew. Eina B'Teila La'olam is not bottled forever.
Why?
Sorry?
Why?
That's the Torah law. I don't even know if it has an actual reason, but that's the Torah law, that a Jew cannot be mavatal avodah zarah that's in his possession.
If a Jew made sin and he made tshuva,
then he's got to get rid of it. He has an isur hana. He's not allowed to benefit from something in his possession that's avodah zarah.
say he was worship avodah zarah.
Yeah. He can do tshuva, but he cannot rectify the fact that this thing that belongs to him is avodah zarah. It stays avodah zarah. It's got to be destroyed.
You see it, even if I've revoked it, you don't know that I've revoked it.
So the Gemora brings a further question, and it says, Eisvei asks the Gemora, Akum shehevi avonim min amar kulis. What would be avodas kechavim? A Gentile brought stones from the idol called Markulis, Mercurius, v'chipo b'en drachim, and used them as paving. He used them to pave the pathways, the roads. V'tartios, and the theaters. Mutarais, it's permissible. V'Yisrael shehevi avonim min amar kulis. But if it was a Jew who did this, there was a certain kind of Roman god called Markulis, Mercurius, and it was made in a certain way from stones. Now, what would you do if the stones are broken and you don't need the idol anymore? You might want to use it for paving. You might want to use it to pave the streets or pave the pathways. So, hi guys, hi Yitzhak, hi Mark. The chipo ben drachim v'tartayos asurais, it's prohibited. So basically, what happens if there was a statue? You know, a lot of people in the demolition industry, you know, when they demolish construction sites sometimes, you can sometimes utilize the stuff again, the paving, the different parts of the building can be reutilized. In fact, one sad story from the tragedy in October the 7th, there was a particular place where a lady survived with her children. It was actually a longer story. But the reason she survived was, although most of the houses in that particular area, my son showed me the story, were not as strong when they threw in grenades and whatever, her place was quite strong because it was made of concrete. Why was it made from concrete? Because the people that built it took concrete from Gush Katif and Yamit and the places that were destroyed and brought it there and built her place. In other words, normally places are built with cheaper materials, but it so happened that some people took some concrete blocks and remains that had come from the original town of Yamit in the Sinai and from other settlements that had been dismantled. And she was living in a concrete place. So when the terrorists arrived at her place, they weren't able to get in and they weren't able to shoot in because it was a concrete structure, the whole thing. It's a true story from this last. Sadly, the same lady, she was divorced by her husband. He died because he was living in the same yeshuv in one place. She was living in another place. They had 4 sons. Each of them had 2 sons. He and one of the sons died in his where he was, but one of the children escaped and managed to run to her place and survived over there. And the reason they survived at her place was because her place was made from concrete. They had made it from broken concrete from the settlements, the yeshivim that were taken down. So it reminded me of this. What happens if they take this idol, this getchka down, and they start to use the pieces for paving? Now, there was a particular type of deity or idol called Mercurius. It was like a Roman god, or Markulis. Markulis was, you know, all the different Roman and Greek mythological gods, they had their symbolic thing. Like there was a god of the weather, you used it to pray for good weather, and a god for other kinds of good luck. And there was, Markulis was about travel. It was the traveler's god. People used to say that they pray to this thing to give them safety while they traveled. And in fact, its symbol was often at the crossroads in Roman places. They would put a symbol of this particular idol or this particular getchka in the crossroads. And funnily enough, the way of serving it, its service was they used to throw pebbles at it or put pebbles down next to it. So there was always a pile of stone next to it. And the rabbis ruled that because the people served the whole thing, not just the idol itself, but the pile of stone next to it was also considered to be avodah zarah. It was considered to be idolatrous substance. So therefore, that would mean that a Jew can't have hana. You can't benefit from it. You can't use it. Unless, as we said, the Gentile himself comes along and revokes the status of the whole thing. The Gentile comes along and says, this is no longer avodah zarah, and breaks it down or makes some kind of action, which shows that he chooses for it not to be Avodah Zarah anymore, then it can be utilized, then it can be used. So what happens over here? This particular brisa says, if it's the guy, the non-Jew, the Gentile, who takes these stones from this god Mercurius and uses them to pave the pathways or the roads, and uses these stones to pave the road, mutarais, then it's permissible. When he took them and he broke the idol, he revoked its avodah zarah status. But if it was a Jew who did this, but if a Jew took these stones from Arkulis and used it to pave the path or the roads, asuris, then it's prohibited. Because once a Jew does it, it's no longer allowed. So the Gemora asked that question. Sorry?
You can't negate.
He can't negate the Avodah Zarah. So the question over here is the same as our question everywhere. Amai, why? What's the problem with the Jew breaking it? We ask Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish, didn't you say that if the Avodah Zarah breaks on its own, it's the same thing as if the non-Jew broke it? So let it be the same thing if the Jew broke it. So the Gemara answers, here too, we follow the principle that we described above of Rava. Rava says, true, that the Jew broke it, could be like it broke on its own, could be midoraisa, from Torah law, that it is revoked, but we made a gzeira, we made a decree that a Jew can't revoke it. Why? Because he could perhaps end up owning it before he revokes it. And once he owns it, it cannot be revoked. In the commentaries, they ask a very good question. What was the worry? The worry was that the Jew will lift it, it becomes his, and then he can't revoke it. But here you're talking about a pile of stones. You're talking about a construction heap. How's he going to lift it? How's he going to lift this whole heap to make it his own? He can't really make a kinyan before he schleps it away. And once he schlepped it away, he's broken the Avodah Zarah. So what's the problem? So on that, the commentators on the Gemora explain, the Pirushim on this Gemora explain that the truth of the matter is there isn't a risk here of the Jew owning it before revoking it. But when the rabbis make a decree, often they make a blanket decree. They don't always differentiate. Once they made a decree and they said that a Jew cannot revoke the status of something that is avodah zarah by breaking it, that decree stands. The logic falls away. Doesn't matter whether it's a small thing that he can lift up and take possession. Doesn't matter whether it's a pile that he can't take possession. The bottom line is they made a blanket decree, and the blanket decree is that a guy, a Gentile, can revoke the status of avodah zarah by breaking or pulling apart. A Jew can't.
The Jew must get it.
Sorry?
He made a mistake. He made a mistake and he took the rocks.
Yes, it's a Shiur.
Mafkirin, I don't think that helps, because once it's in his possession, the status of avodah zarah cannot be. It has to be destroyed, I think, crushed.
By the Jew.
Well, no Jew would be able to benefit from it.
Oh, you can call the Hamas.
They'll come smash it.
So someone came to you and said he has a pile of paving, use it for your driveway, and you don't know where it comes from. What would happen then?
You'd be fine, because in most cases the paving is not made for
whatever.
Yeah.
But if you don't know where it's from, it's fine. Because that doesn't look like
you would be able to go with what's most common, the chazaka. And the chazaka is that generally speaking, paving doesn't come from a statue. But if you live in a place where the most common stuff that's around is broken pieces of statue, then you might have a problem. It depends on. Although the broken pieces of statue are probably broken while they were in the possession of non-Jews anyway. The next piece, which is quite interesting.
When you go traveling down there.
Does it make a difference whether it's deliberate or
not this year.
Yeah, that's exactly was the discussion. Deliberate for sure revokes the status, and not deliberate, according to Resh Lakish, is the same. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not. According to that's shenishtabra meilel, it broke on its own. That was the argument between Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said it's not good enough because he didn't break it.
Yes.
Resh Lakish said it is good enough. The next thing the Gemora discusses, which is fairly similar, goes like this. What happens, you've got a craftsman, and the craftsman goes up to the statue that's Avodah Zarah, and he starts to sand it down or to shave it. In other words, he's got a grinding machine or whatever it is, and he is doing he's got the statue, and he's blasting it away. He's shaving off a layer. Why is he shaving off a layer of a statue? One of two things. Either he wants to make it nicer. It's part of, how would you call it? It's part of the arts. He's trying to enhance it. Or the opposite. He wants some of that material and he doesn't care about it anymore. So he's basically turning it into a salvage. He's saying, I'm going to graze off some of it. I want to make a mosaic. So I'm going to pull off from this unused thing in the storeroom. I'm now going to shave off a layer which I want to use for another purpose.
Or maybe he wanted to grow back.
Yeah. What's the difference between the two? If he's shaving it to improve it, what does that mean? It's still important to him. It's still a deity. He's not provoking the status. If he's shaving it because he wants to destroy it but use its shavings for something else, then it's like breaking it. Then he's revoking the status. And our question when it comes to Anar, to utilizing it, is on two things. What about the status of the statue? What about the status of the shavings? Maybe it's an expensive sand material. What about both? So Eisvei, we ask a question. If you have a non-Jew, that he shaved down an idolatrous statue for his purposes, meaning not to make it better, to make it worse, but to take some of that material and go and use it for a different use. Now, both the idol itself and the shavings are permissible. Why? Because it's the same as if he broke it. By shaving it in a way that he didn't want it to have that layer anymore, he indicates that he was happy to break it, to revoke its status as an idol. He's now going to sell it for its weight in whatever kind of stone it is. He's going to take it off to recycling plants. And he also wants the shavings. So therefore, he v'shipuya mutarin, both the idol itself and the shavings are permissible. If he comes to a Jewish merchant and he says, I want to sell you my idol and my shavings, the Jewish merchant can buy it, because the fact that you shaved off the shavings means you didn't want the idol and you wanted the shavings, but neither are a deity anymore. Letzarka, but the other way around, if he did the shaving because he wanted to make it nice, that's how he was going to varnish it and make it look even prettier. He, Asura, the idol, remains prohibited because he didn't provoke its status. On the contrary, he was doing some maintenance over there. He was a sculptor in art and maintenance. So he, Asura, it remains prohibited. But the Shipuya Mutarid, the shavings are okay, because those shavings that he cut off are no longer part of the idol. So they can be used. That's if it's a Gentile doing all of this. What happens if the craftsman was a Jew? If it was a Jew who went and shaved a layer off an idolatrous statue, then we don't care. Whether he wanted the shavings, whether he was a naughty Jew who wanted to improve the Avodah Zarah itself, he was Shipuya Asura, and everything remains prohibited. The idol's still prohibited, the shavings are still prohibited. So the Gemara asks the same question, why don't we consider this like any other case of avodas kechavim, of an idol that broke on its own? And again, it's a question on Resh Lakish. We're hammering Resh Lakish with a number of questions. So why is it not the same as something that broke on its own? So Resh Lakish would answer, Hachanami kiderava. Here too, we use that same formula, that same logic of Rava. That truthfully speaking, we should allow the fact that the Jew broke it or shaved it to revoke the status. But we have this decree of the rabbis that a Jew is not allowed to revoke the status because we worry that he'll take it into his possession, his ownership, and only then try to revoke the status. which doesn't work.
Does he then become a Buddhist?
Sorry.
Was he still a Jew?
We didn't say whether he's a Jew or not. He's a Jew. He's a Jew. He's done something wrong, but he's still a Jew. Okay, I think maybe we'll stop at that point.
We said we're not even allowed to go into a place where there are statues.
Sorry?
We're not allowed to go into a place where there are statues, like a church.
Well, it depends. It depends which kind. Yeah. Ones that are like a temple. That's an Avodah Zarah temple. Yeah.
So then, if those kind of statues are around you, the Jew should never be near them.
Except for one thing, that in certain places, like the ancient empires, Rome or whatever, they were in the streets. They were in the town squares. What are you going to do? You're not going to walk in the town square. Because it's there, you had no choice. But when somebody tries to sell it to you, or
You should say no.
you can't use it.
Yeah.
And the other thing you can't do is you can't use it for benefit. You can't have hana. So for instance, when you're walking around with your lunchbox and you're tired and you're looking for a shady place to stop on a sunny day like today, that's not where you're going to sit down and have lunch, because you don't want to benefit from its shade.
Once it on his as a chair.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's basically where we'll stop inside. The guys want to catch a l'chaim or a chat.
Thanks, Raz.
So a pleasure. Take so it may not be Avodah Zarah, because it depends what sometimes it's just a cultural thing. In other words, you go to a museum, it might be that the statue that's there is just a cultural artifact and not an actual one that was served. That's part of what this Gemora was discussing. Sometimes they would make these different implements, but not actually use them. They were never utilized. They were never inaugurated into actual Avodah Zarah. And that's why, if you remember, the earlier Mishnah that we learned, the sages were actually arguing, is this Avodah Zarah or not? And Rabbi Meir said, yeah, mipnei shenevat pa'amachas bashana. Even if they use it once a year, it's enough. And the rabbi said, no, that's not enough. So that you'd be in that kind of situation. Normally, coming back to practicality, because Gemora is not halacha, but chances are you wouldn't have a problem in a museum, because generally what's sitting in a museum is not going to be pure Avodah Zarah. I think in most cases.
But Rabbi, what if it originally from Avodah Zarah? And along the way, Islam is evolution, and it becomes like generation after generation, it becomes like
so it would be
originally.
But originally it was, so as long as there were Gentiles, non-Jews, that revoked the status of Avodah Zarah. So when one guy went and stuck it in a museum somewhere, he won it at an auction or whatever, and he said, this is what people used to serve in ancient Greece, 2000, I don't know what, 1500 years ago. But I mean, the reason I'm interested in it is because it's art. Probably the way he sets it up as an piece of art, he's in his actions showing that by him it's no longer a deity. So that unwinds the status of Avodah Zarah.
As a Jew, originally Avodah Zarah has been forbidden. The Torah has been there for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So as a Jew, you can regard it as a part of piece of art.
Now, what happens is but the Torah itself is the guideline of law. And the Torah says that the Gentile has the power to revoke the status of it as Avodah Zarah. So if a Gentile revoked it, then it's revoked. But if a Jew took it into his possession, then we have a problem. Because he can't revoke. So if somebody tells you, that this particular thing of Avodah Zarah was sold to a Jewish family 1,000 years ago, and unfortunately that Jewish family went off the rails in their spiritual whatever, and they joined the people they were Hellenists, let's say, or whatever. They joined the people who served that Avodah Zarah, and they took possession of it. Now you got a problem, because once they owned it as Avodah Zarah, it can never be revoked. That is a general principle. We've got a lot of technicalities here, but the general principle is that once a Jew owns Avodah Zarah, it can never be revoked. It can only be destroyed. But Gentiles can.
If you donate it to a museum, now it's not going to be used as Avodah Zarah.
Once a Jew served it as Avodah Zarah, owned it, it's over. In other words, it needs to be revoked before it goes into the possession of a Jew, not after. The Gzeira, the decree of the rabbis, once a Jew has possession of Avodah Zarah in its form as Avodah Zarah, then it's over. It can never be revoked. So if he was a follower, let's say it was the time of the Greeks and he was a Hellenist,
church, but now it lands up in a museum, as you say.
well, in most cases, if it
And
ends
no
up
one's
as an
coming to the
artifact,
museum to, to break it.
yeah, in most cases, if it ends up in a museum, the chances are that somewhere in the history of it changing hands over the generations, a non-Jew would have revoked its status as Avodah Zarah. And chances are that it wouldn't have been in the possession of a Jew as Avodah Zarah. And if we don't know, then it doesn't matter. Our issue is if we know that it came from Jewish ownership. If, for instance, somebody tells you that there was a particular family in the time of the Hellenists, and they served together with them, and this was their idol at that time, boom, then you got a problem, even a few thousand years later.
Okay.